The crystal flute felt like a scepter in his hand, from his vantage point near the towering ice sculpture of a swan. Liam Garrett surveyed the grand ballroom of the Astor Hotel, the air thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with the conversations of the city's elite. On his arm, Katerina Petrov was a vision in emerald silk, her laughter like a perfectly tuned bell drawing admiring glances that Liam absorbed as his own. He was here. He had arrived. This night, the annual Viridian Dynamics Starlight Serenity Gala was his coronation. He was the rising star, the man with the brilliant future, and the beautiful woman beside him was the perfect accessory. The lie he'd told his wife, a dull, mandatory work retreat, was a small necessary price for this taste of the life he truly deserved. He took a sip of champagne, the bubbles a fizzy premonition of his victory. He felt untouchable. Liam Garrett believed life was a game of chess, and he was 3 moves from checkmate. At 32, he was a senior project manager at Viridian Dynamics, a titan of the tech finance world. He had a corner office, well, an office near a corner, a 6-figure salary, and a clear trajectory to a vice presidency before he hit 40. He had played every move perfectly. He'd graduated top of his class, networked relentlessly, and put in the punishing hours that separated the contenders from the coasters. His marriage to Nora had been another strategic move, at least in the beginning. Nora Wallace was beautiful, intelligent, and came from a respectable, if not wealthy, family. She was an architectural designer, with a quiet ambition that he'd found charming. She was the perfect wife for a man on the rise, elegant, supportive, and content to manage their tastefully decorated Upper East Side apartment while he climbed the corporate ladder. But lately, Nora had become a complication. A beautiful 7 months pregnant complication. The pregnancy hadn't been planned. When Nora had told him, her eyes shining with tears of joy, Liam had felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. A baby. The word itself sounded like an anchor. It meant sleepless nights, divided attention, and a crippling financial drain. It meant his sharp, tailored suits would soon be competing for closet space with diaper bags and strollers. It was a distraction he couldn't afford. His ambition was a ravenous beast, and a baby was a cage. He'd masked his disappointment with practiced smiles and feigned excitement, rubbing Nora's swelling belly, while his mind calculated the cost of childcare versus the setback to his career. He loved Nora, or at least he loved the idea of her, the stable, comfortable life she represented. But his passion, his true all-consuming desire, was for success. And success, he was beginning to believe, required a different kind of partner. That partner was Katerina Petrov. Katerina was a recent hire in the marketing department, a sharp, hungry analyst with eyes the color of whiskey, and an ambition that mirrored his own. She was 26, unencumbered, and saw the world exactly as he did, a ladder to be climbed with no time for sentimental attachments. Their affair had started 6 months ago, a spark of illicit excitement at a late-night project meeting that quickly erupted into a wildfire. With Katerina, Liam felt seen. She didn't talk about nursery colors or birthing plans. She talked about quarterly reports, market hostile takeovers, and the weaknesses of their superiors. She looked at him not as a future father, but as a future CEO. She was a reflection of his own desires, sleek and uncomplicated. She was the life he wanted, and Nora was the life he had. The Starlight Serenity Gala was the most important event on the Viridian Dynamics calendar. It was a night where deals were made over canapes and careers were cemented over cocktails. Attendance wasn't just mandatory for someone at his level. It was an opportunity. Last year, a junior manager had impressed the board with a casual comment about emerging markets and was promoted to director a month later. Liam knew this was his stage, but partners were expected, and showing up with his heavily pregnant wife felt like a declaration of domesticity, a signal that his focus was shifting from the boardroom to the nursery. It was a weakness he couldn't afford to show, so he lied. "It's a last-minute leadership retreat," he'd told Nora 2 weeks ago, carefully folding his laundry to avoid looking her in the eye. Upstate, some rustic lodge with no cell service, mandatory for all senior managers. Beaumont's new initiative. Nora had been resting on the sofa, a hand resting protectively on her stomach. She looked tired, her natural glow dimmed by the strains of the 3rd trimester. "Oh, Liam, this weekend. But we were going to finish the nursery." "I know, honey. I'm so sorry," he'd said, his voice dripping with synthetic regret. "I tried to get out of it, but it's Desmond Beaumont's pet project. You know how he is. My hands are tied." He'd leaned down and kissed her forehead, inhaling the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo and feeling a pang of something he refused to identify as guilt. "It's only 2 nights. I'll be back Sunday afternoon, and I promise we'll spend the whole day on the baby's room." She had sighed a soft, weary sound. "Okay. Just be safe. I don't like the idea of you driving up there so late." "I'll be fine," he'd assured her. "I'll miss you. Both of you." The lie had been surprisingly easy. It slid off his tongue like silk. Now, standing in their bedroom, 2 weeks later, the lie was taking physical form. He adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie, the dark silk a stark contrast to the crisp white of his bespoke shirt. He checked his reflection in the antique mirror above Nora's dresser. The man looking back was powerful, confident. He looked like he belonged at the Astor. From the living room, he could hear the television murmuring. Nora was likely already asleep on the couch. He grabbed his garment bag, which held his tuxedo, and his briefcase. "I'm heading out, honey," he called, his voice bright and cheerful. There was a rustle from the other room, and Nora appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a soft cashmere robe. She looked pale. "Already be careful on the road, Liam." "Always," he said, walking over to kiss her. Her lips were soft, but her eyes were searching. For a terrifying second he thought she knew. He saw a flicker of doubt, a shadow of suspicion in their depths. But then it was gone, replaced by a tired smile. "Call me when you get there, if you can get a signal," she said. "Of course. The minute I do," he lied again. "Now get some rest. Don't wait up." He left the apartment without looking back. The weight of his deception, a thrilling electric current in his veins. He took a taxi not to some fictional upstate lodge, but to a suite he'd booked at the St. Regis, where Katerina was waiting. When he opened the door, she was standing by the window, the city lights of Manhattan glittering behind her like a carpet of diamonds. She turned, and his breath caught. She was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that clung to her every curve. A diamond necklace, a gift from him, sparkled at her throat. "You're late," she purred, gliding towards him. "The wife was saying her goodbyes," he said, dropping his bags and pulling her into an embrace. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and ambition. "Poor you," she whispered, her lips brushing against his ear. "Trapped with the Madonna while your kingdom awaits. Don't worry. Tonight you're with your queen." He kissed her, then a hard, possessive kiss that was less about affection and more about sealing his choice. This was real. The power, the glamour, the woman in his arms. This was the life he was choosing, the one he was fighting for. As they prepared for the gala, sharing a bottle of champagne and laughing about office politics, the image of Nora, pale and tired in the doorway of their apartment, faded from his mind like a distant, irrelevant dream. The Astor Hotel's grand ballroom was designed to intimidate. 30-foot ceilings were adorned with frescoes of mythical Greek scenes, and from their center hung 3 colossal crystal chandeliers that refracted the light into 1,000,000 dazzling shards. The air was a symphony of clinking glasses, discreet laughter, and the gentle melody of a string quartet tucked away in a gilded alcove. The most powerful people in New York City drifted through the room like sharks in a well-tailored aquarium, their movements smooth and deliberate. Liam Garrett, with Katerina on his arm, navigated the crowd with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, but projected with masterful skill. He was one of them tonight. He belonged. "There's Robert Peterson from the acquisition team," he murmured to Katerina, nodding towards a portly man holding court by the champagne fountain. "He controls the budget for the Phoenix Initiative. I need a word with him later. And that's Beatrice Croft, head of European operations." Katerina counted her eyes, scanning the room with the precision of a sniper. "They say she's on the short list for the board. Her husband left her for his assistant last year. She'd probably appreciate a woman who isn't a cliché." They were a team, a power couple. As they moved through the room, Liam exchanged handshakes and knowing smiles. He introduced Katerina not as his date, but with a clever ambiguity. "This is Katerina Petrov, one of our brightest minds in marketing. She's been instrumental on the new campaign, and it positioned her as a brilliant colleague and him as a discerning leader who recognized talent. People were impressed. He could feel their approval, a warm balm on his ego. For an hour, everything was perfect. He secured a brief but promising chat with Peterson, who clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Keep up the good work, Garrett. I'm hearing great things." He and Katerina shared a dance, moving effortlessly across the polished marble floor, feeling the envious eyes of junior analysts and administrative staff on them. They were the golden couple, a portrait of success. "I could get used to this." Katerina whispered, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "This is just the beginning." Liam promised, his voice low and certain. "Next year, we won't just be guests, we'll be hosting." The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to the grand staircase. A man in a tuxedo stepped up to a microphone on a small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced, his voice echoing through the vast space. "If I could have your attention, please. It is my great honor to introduce the man whose vision and leadership have propelled Viridian Dynamics to the forefront of global innovation. The chairman of the board, our CEO, Mr. Desmond Beaumont." A wave of applause rippled through the room. Liam straightened his tie, a frisson of anticipation running down his spine. Beaumont was the king of this castle, a semi-mythical figure known for his ruthless business acumen and his intensely private nature. A moment of FaceTime with Beaumont tonight could change everything. Desmond Beaumont appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He was in his late 50s, tall and silver-haired, with a presence that commanded absolute silence. He wore his power not like a heavy cloak, but like a perfectly tailored suit. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, swept across the room, and for a moment, Liam felt as though the CEO was looking directly at him. Beaumont smiled, a rare and brief event, and extended his hand. But he wasn't alone. From the shadows of the upper landing, a figure emerged to take his arm. It was a woman. She was radiant, her face glowing with a serene beauty that seemed to outshine the chandeliers. She wore a bespoke gown of deep sapphire velvet that draped elegantly over her very pregnant form. Her dark hair was swept up in a graceful chignon, revealing a delicate string of pearls at her neck. She moved with a quiet confidence, a gentle smile on her lips, as she descended the staircase on the arm of the most powerful man in the room. And Liam felt the world stop. The champagne flute in his hand suddenly felt slick with sweat. The blood drained from his face, replaced by an icy torrent of pure, unadulterated panic. The hum of the crowd faded into a deafening roar in his ears. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Because the woman on Desmond Beaumont's arm, the guest of honor, looking for all the world like royalty, was his wife. Nora. Liam, are you all right? Katerina's voice was a distant needle in the roaring silence of his mind. You look like you've seen a ghost. He couldn't answer. He could only stare, paralyzed, as Nora and Mr. Beaumont reached the bottom of the staircase. They were greeted with a fresh wave of applause. Beaumont raised a hand for silence, his other arm still linked with Nora's. Thank you all for coming, Beaumont began, his voice calm and authoritative. I'm delighted you could all be here tonight, and I am especially honored to be accompanied by a very dear friend and one of the most brilliant architectural minds in the city, Miss Nora Wallace. Miss Nora Wallace, not Mrs. Liam Garrett. The choice of words was a deliberate surgical strike. Nora's eyes scanned the crowd. She wasn't looking around aimlessly. She was searching. And then her gaze found him. Across the sea of faces, through the shimmering light and champagne-fueled chatter, her eyes locked with his. There was no shock in her expression, no surprise, no tearful confusion. There was only a calm, cool, and utterly devastating certainty. A quiet strength that terrified him more than any scream ever could. In that single silent moment, Liam understood. This was not a coincidence. This was an execution, and he was the one on the chopping block. He felt Katerina stiffen beside him. Liam, she hissed, her voice tight with confusion and dawning horror. That's your wife. What is your pregnant wife doing here with the CEO? Liam Garrett. The man who was 3 moves from checkmate finally looked down at the board and realized he had been playing the wrong game all along. He had never been the player. He had only ever been the pawn. The world, which had stopped for a brief, heart-stopping eternity, came crashing back into motion with brutal force. Liam's first instinct was primal flight. He wanted to turn, to melt into the damask wallpaper, to become invisible. He gave Katerina's arm a sharp tug. We have to go, he rasped, his throat dry as dust. Now. Katerina pulled her arm away, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Go, Liam, what is going on? You told me she was upstate. You told me she was sick. Her voice was a low, venomous whisper. The adoration from moments before had curdled into contempt. I can explain later. We just need to leave, he insisted, his eyes darting around the room. It was too late. People were already starting to notice. He saw Peterson from Acquisitions raise an eyebrow. He saw Beatrice Croft lean in to whisper something to her colleague. The whispers were spreading a poison seeping through the elegant crowd. He and Katerina, the golden couple, were suddenly the subject of intense, predatory scrutiny. They were a scandal in the making. Before he could drag Katerina towards the exit, the crowd parted. Desmond Beaumont was approaching with Nora still gracefully on his arm. They moved with an unhurried, regal pace that felt like the slow walk of a headsman. Liam's mind raced, desperately searching for a story, a lie, any plausible explanation that could defuse the bomb that was about to detonate in the center of his life. Nothing came. His usually sharp intellect was a fog of pure panic. "Garrett," Beaumont said, his voice a smooth, cold stone. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over Liam and then landing on Katerina with dismissive curiosity. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure." Liam's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He felt Katerina jab him sharply in the ribs. "This is Katerina Petrov." Liam managed to stammer his voice, sounding thin and foreign. "From marketing. A colleague." The word colleague felt pathetic and hollow. Nora's gaze fell upon Katerina. She took in the emerald dress, the diamond necklace, her diamond necklace, Liam realized, with a fresh wave of horror. A family heirloom he had claimed was being reset at the jeweler, and her expression remained one of serene composure. There was no flicker of anger, only a faint, almost imperceptible sadness. "Miss Petrov," Nora said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the tension. "That is a beautiful necklace. It has been in my husband's family for generations." Katerina's hand flew to her throat, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. The diamonds suddenly felt like burning coals against her skin. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with betrayal and humiliation. She wasn't just his mistress. She was an unwitting participant in a theft, a pawn in a game far more complex than she had imagined. Beaumont watched the exchange with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. "Indeed," he said, his eyes finally settling on Liam, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Family is so important, isn't it, Garrett? A foundation of trust and integrity. Tell me, how is the leadership retreat going? I confess I wasn't aware I had scheduled one." The question was a clean, precise stab. It wasn't an accusation. It was a verdict. The lie was exposed, laid bare for everyone to see. There was no escape. Liam felt the eyes of everyone in their vicinity on him. The string quartet had stopped playing. The only sound was the frantic pounding of his own heart. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," he began, but the words died on his lips. "No, Liam," Nora said, speaking directly to him for the first time. Her voice was still quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. "There has been no misunderstanding. There has only been a clarification." She looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time he saw past the gentle wife he had taken for granted. He saw a woman of immense, formidable strength, a woman who had taken her deepest pain and forged it into a weapon of righteous judgment. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her profoundly. Beaumont gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his security detail, who began to subtly shepherd the nearest guests away, creating a small, isolated island of humiliation. "Nora, my dear, perhaps you'd like to get some fresh air," Beaumont suggested gently, his tone shifting from icy executive to concerned friend. "The air in here has become rather unpleasant." He guided Nora away, leaving Liam standing alone with Katerina. The protective bubble burst, and the full force of Katerina's fury erupted. "You absolute fool!" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. She ripped the necklace from her throat, the clasp breaking, and shoved it into his chest. "You used me, You brought me here to be humiliated in front of the entire company. My career is over. You've ruined me. Kate, listen to me." He started reaching for her. "Don't you dare touch me!" She spat, backing away, as if he were diseased. "You are a dead man, Liam Garrett, and you are on your own." She turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her emerald dress a streak of color in his collapsing world. Liam was left standing alone in the center of the ballroom floor. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a dull, condemning roar. He saw his boss, the head of his department, pointedly turn his back. He saw the faces of his colleagues, a mixture of pity, disgust, and schadenfreude. He had walked into the Starlight Serenity Gala, feeling like a king. He now knew with sickening certainty that he had just walked into his own public execution. He was no longer a rising star. He was a cautionary tale, a disgrace. And the worst part, the part that twisted in his gut like a shard of glass, was that he had no one to blame but himself. The story of Nora's arrival at the gala didn't begin that night. It began 5 weeks earlier with the scent of perfume. It was a Tuesday. Liam had come home late, claiming a project had blown up, and he'd been forced to stay and put out the fire. It was a common occurrence, one Nora had long accepted as part of being married to an ambitious man. He'd slipped into bed murmuring a tired apology and fallen asleep instantly. But Nora had stayed awake, her mind racing. As he'd leaned over to kiss her goodnight, she had caught a faint, unfamiliar fragrance on his shirt collar. It was a floral, musky scent, expensive and distinct. It was not her perfume. It was not the perfume of any of his female colleagues she knew. It was the first loose thread. Nora had tried to dismiss it. She was pregnant. Her hormones were a mess, and her sense of smell was notoriously heightened. She was being paranoid. But the thread once noticed could not be unseen. She started to pay attention. The late nights became more frequent. The business trips on weekends, which had once been rare, were now a monthly occurrence. Liam grew more distant, his phone guarded with a ferocity that was new and alarming. He would take calls in the other room, his voice a low conspiratorial murmur. When she'd once found his credit card statement left on the counter, she noticed a charge for a lavish dinner at La Perle, a romantic restaurant they had never been to together. When she asked him about it, he'd waved it away as a client dinner, his eyes not quite meeting hers. The lies were clumsy, but her trust in him had been so absolute that she hadn't seen them for what they were. Now her vision was painfully clear. Each lie was a small cut, and she was bleeding out emotionally in the beautiful apartment they had built together. The confirmation came from a single, careless mistake. Liam had a habit of syncing his personal calendar with the family's shared digital calendar on the kitchen tablet. He usually remembered to set his more sensitive appointments to private. One Thursday afternoon, he forgot. An entry popped up on the tablet screen. K. St. Regis, 8 p.m. It was for the following night. It was an evening he had told her he would be working late at the office. Nora felt the floor drop out from under her. K. Katerina Petrov, the sharp, pretty new girl from marketing he had mentioned once or twice. Nora's heart fractured. It wasn't a clean break, but a splintering, a spiderweb of cracks, spreading through everything she had believed was solid and true. She sat at her kitchen table for an hour, one hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kicks of their unborn child, and wept. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to throw his perfectly ironed shirts out the window. But what would that achieve? He would lie. He would deny, deflect, and gaslight her until she questioned her own sanity. She would be the hysterical pregnant wife, and he would be the calm, rational husband dealing with her hormonal outbursts. He would win. As her tears subsided, a cold, hard resolve began to form in their place. This wasn't just an affair. It was a profound betrayal of the vows they had made and the family they were about to create. He had gambled with their future, with her dignity, with their child's life. A quiet, private confrontation was not enough. The punishment had to fit the crime. His reputation, the very thing he valued more than her, more than their baby, had to be the price. That weekend, she called Desmond Beaumont. Mr. Beaumont was not just Liam's CEO. He had been a close, dear friend of her late father. They had gone to business school together. When her father passed away from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, Desmond had stepped in, becoming a quiet, protective presence in her life. He'd sent her a card on every birthday, offered her sage advice when she started her own design firm, and attended her wedding to Liam, giving a warm speech that had brought her to tears. He was family. They met for coffee in a discreet corner of a cafe in the West Village. Nora, her voice trembling at first, laid out her suspicions, her evidence and the calendar entry. She didn't cry. Her pain was too deep for tears. It had solidified into a cold, heavy weight in her chest. Desmond listened patiently, his piercing blue eyes filled with a deep, fatherly concern. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, stirring his espresso. "Nora," he said. Finally, his voice gentle but firm. "I am so terribly sorry that you are going through this. You and this child deserve so much better." He sighed a heavy, weary sound. "To be honest, I've had my own concerns about Liam for some time." Nora looked up surprised. "Professionally," he clarified. "He's ambitious, which is fine, but his ambition is brittle. He cuts corners. He takes credit for the work of his junior team members. On the Phoenix Initiative, he submitted a report with projections so wildly optimistic they bordered on fraudulent. I've had my internal audit team looking into his work for the past month. He's a man who cares more about the appearance of success than the integrity it takes to achieve it." He looked at her directly. "It seems his character is consistent in all aspects of his life." That was the moment the plan began to form. "The Starlight Gala is in 2 weeks," Desmond said, his mind already working. "He will be there. He cannot afford to miss it. And a man like him will not attend alone. He will want to show off his conquest. He told me he has a mandatory work retreat that weekend." Nora said, the lie now sounding absurdly transparent. Desmond's lips thinned into a hard line. "Of course he did. Nora, you could confront him at home. He will lie and deny. Or you could confront him in the place where his reputation is currency. You could walk in on the arm of his boss, not as a victim, but as an honored guest. You let the world see him for what he is." The idea was terrifying. The thought of facing Liam and his mistress in public made her feel physically ill. But the alternative, a tearful private fight where he would control the narrative, was worse. This was not about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back her power. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger than she thought possible. In the 2 weeks that followed, Nora operated with a newfound purpose. She enlisted Desmond's help. His private secretary arranged for a confidential appointment with one of the top divorce attorneys in the city, an aggressive but brilliant woman named Helena Shaw. Nora met with her, calmly explained the situation, and began the process of financially disentangling herself from Liam. Desmond's team did a quiet background check on Katerina Petrov, revealing a history of leveraging relationships for professional gain at her previous 2 jobs. They also discovered through a discreet inquiry at a high-end jeweler that Liam had recently brought in a family heirloom, an antique diamond necklace to be cleaned. He had picked it up the day before. The sapphire velvet dress was Desmond's idea. "You will not look like a victim," he had told her. "You will look like a queen." He commissioned it from a private couturier, a designer Nora had always admired. When she tried it on, looking at her reflection, pregnant, powerful, and poised, she finally felt ready. On the night of the gala, as Liam was kissing her goodbye, she had to marshal every ounce of her strength to keep her face a mask of placid ignorance. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, her composure broke for a moment. She leaned against the door, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of mourning for the man she thought she had married, and for the future he had so carelessly thrown away. Then she wiped the tear away, took a deep breath, and began to get ready. An hour later, a black town car sent by Mr. Beaumont was waiting for her downstairs. As she rode towards the Astor, she didn't feel nervous. She felt calm. She was no longer Liam Garrett's wife, a supporting character in his story. She was Nora Wallace, and this was the first page of hers. The drive from the Astor was a blur of recriminations and screeching tires. Liam gripped the steering wheel of his Audi, his knuckles white, as Katerina unleashed a torrent of fury from the passenger seat. "A family heirloom!" "You gave me his pregnant wife's necklace!" she shrieked, her voice raw. "Do you have any idea how I looked? I looked like a cheap, pathetic thief. I didn't think she would be there." Liam shot back his own panic, fueling his anger. "How was I supposed to know she was friends with Desmond Beaumont? Maybe you should know more about the woman you married." Katerina laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "God, you are so stupid. You talked about ambition, about taking over the world. You can't even manage your own house. You're finished, Liam. Utterly finished, and you will not drag me down with you." When he pulled up in front of her apartment building, she didn't wait for him to stop the engine. She threw open the door and got out, turning back to glare at him through the open window. "Delete my number, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "If anyone from work asks, I will tell them you pursued me, that you lied to me about your marital status, and that I ended it the moment I found out the truth. You are on your own." She slammed the door and stalked into her building without a backward glance. Liam sat in the car for a long time, the engine humming, the silence in the car, a screaming accusation. He was alone. Truly and completely alone. The drive back to the Upper East Side apartment he shared with Nora was the longest of his life. Each street light, each passing car, felt like a judgment. He rehearsed apologies, excuses, justifications in his head. But they all sounded feeble and pathetic. What could he possibly say? He let himself into the apartment, his key scraping in the lock. The silence was absolute. The lights were off, save for a single lamp in the bedroom. All of Nora's things. Her coat from the hook by the door, her shoes, her laptop from the living room, table and table were gone. A cold dread, heavier and more profound than the panic he'd felt at the gala, settled over him. On the center of their perfectly made bed lay a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. It was Nora's personal letterhead. Her handwriting was as neat and elegant as ever. There were no blots, no angry slashes, no signs of emotional distress. It was calm, controlled, and utterly devastating. "Liam, I will be staying with friends. Do not try to contact me. You will be hearing from my lawyer, Helena Shaw, on Monday morning. She will handle all further communication regarding the dissolution of our marriage and the division of our assets. The locks will be changed tomorrow. Nora." No, I'm leaving you. No, how could you? No emotional appeal. It was a business memo, a transaction. Their marriage, their life together, their future family, were all reduced to a few sterile sentences. He had treated their marriage as a strategic alliance, and in the end, she was dissolving it with the same ruthless efficiency. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the note trembling in his hand. He was in checkmate. The weekend was a living hell. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He paced the silent, empty apartment, the half-finished nursery, a constant mocking reminder of the future he had obliterated. He called Nora's phone 100 times. It went straight to voicemail. He called her mother, her sister, her best friend. None of them picked up. He was an island completely cut off from the world he had once inhabited. On Monday morning, the true professional fallout began. He walked into the offices of Viridian Dynamics and was met with a wall of silence. The usual morning buzz was absent. People at their desks fell quiet as he passed, their eyes following him, before they quickly looked down at their screens. His assistant, a young woman who had always been friendly and cheerful, gave him a tight, nervous smile and told him that his 9 a.m. meeting had been cancelled. In fact, his entire calendar for the day was empty. At 10 a.m., he received an email from Human Resources. The subject line was stark, mandatory meeting. He was shown into a sterile conference room. 2 people were waiting for him, the head of HR, a woman named Carol, and his own boss, Frank, the man who had been his mentor. Frank wouldn't meet his eye. "Liam," Carol began, her tone devoid of any warmth. "We have a serious situation here. We've received multiple reports regarding your conduct at the Starlight Serenity Gala on Saturday evening." It was a personal matter, Liam said, his voice hoarse. "Bringing a junior employee as your date to a company event while misrepresenting your marital status and publicly deceiving your spouse, who happened to be the guest of the CEO, is not a personal matter. Liam." Frank cut in, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It's a catastrophic lapse in judgment. It speaks to your character. Frank, I can fix this." "It's too late for that," Carol said, sliding a folder across the table. "This isn't just about the gala. Mr. Beaumont has authorized a full review of your project management, specifically concerning the Phoenix Initiative." Liam felt a fresh jolt of fear. The Phoenix Initiative. The project he had been cutting corners on for months, fudging the numbers to make his department look more successful than it was. "It has come to our attention," Carol continued, "that there are significant discrepancies in your progress reports. Your projections for market penetration were based on outdated and frankly manipulated data. You have deliberately misled the board and endangered a 9-figure investment." The affair was the public face of his disgrace. But this was the nail in his professional coffin. Beaumont hadn't just exposed his infidelity. He had used it as the justification to expose his professional fraud. The morality clause in his contract was a catch-all. His personal failings were now inextricably linked with his professional ones. "We are placing you on immediate indefinite suspension, pending the results of a full internal audit." Carol said, her voice final. "Please hand over your company ID laptop and phone. Security will escort you from the building." Liam stared at them dumbfounded. Suspension. Security. Escorted from the building. These were things that happened to other people, to failures. Not to him. He was a ghost walking out of the Viridian Dynamics building, a cardboard box of his personal effects in his hands. The city he had sought to conquer felt vast and hostile. He looked up at the gleaming glass tower of his former office and understood that he hadn't just lost a job. He had been erased. The weeks following his suspension were a slow, agonizing descent into a personal hell of his own making. The word suspension was a corporate euphemism. Liam knew he would never set foot in Viridian Dynamics again. The internal audit was a formality, a tool to build an ironclad case for his termination and to ensure he couldn't sue for wrongful dismissal. His first call on Monday had not been to a headhunter, but to a lawyer, a man whose smarmy television ad promised to fight for the little guy. The lawyer listened to Liam's story and practically laughed him out of the office. "Let me get this straight," the lawyer had said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "You cheated on your pregnant wife, who is a personal friend of your CEO. You took your mistress, a subordinate, to the company's biggest event. You gave the mistress a family heirloom belonging to your wife. And your bosses have found evidence of you cooking the books on a major project, Mr. Garrett. You don't have a case. You have a public relations disaster. My advice, sign whatever they put in front of you and pray they don't sue you." The call from Helena Shaw. Nora's lawyer came on Tuesday. Her voice was calm, professional, and utterly uncompromising. "Mr. Garrett," she began, "I represent Nora Wallace. I am sure you understand that she is seeking a divorce on the grounds of adultery. Given the public nature of your indiscretion and the emotional distress caused during her pregnancy, we are prepared to move swiftly." Liam tried to plead to ask if he could just speak to Nora. "All communication will go through me," Shaw stated flatly. "Nora's priority right now is her health and the health of her unborn child. She needs to be insulated from any further stress. We have already filed a petition to have you vacate the marital apartment, which, as you know, was purchased with a significant down payment from a trust left by Nora's father. Given your current employment status, we believe this is in everyone's best interest." He was being kicked out of his own home. He had a week. He spent those last few days in the apartment like a ghost surrounded by the life he had systematically dismantled. He packed his belongings into boxes, each object a painful memory. The photograph from their honeymoon in Italy, the silly coffee mug Nora had given him for his birthday, the tiny pair of sneakers they had bought together after their first ultrasound. He tried to salvage his career, making discreet calls to contacts at other firms. The response was universally chilly. The story of the Gala had spread through the tight-knit world of New York finance and tech like a virus. No one wanted to touch him. He was toxic, a liability. The man with the golden future was now radioactive. Katerina, as promised, had thrown him to the wolves. Liam heard through the grapevine that she had given a tearful, convincing performance to HR, painting herself as the innocent victim of a manipulative superior. She claimed he'd told her he was already separated and that the Gala was meant to be their first public outing as a couple. She had kept her job. In a cruel twist of irony, her reputation as a woman who had been wronged by a powerful man gave her a strange sort of cachet. She had played her hand perfectly. The day he moved out of the apartment was grey and rainy, a fitting, pathetic fallacy for the state of his life. He hauled his boxes into a rented van and drove to a soulless, month-to-month furnished apartment in a neighborhood he used to fly over in a helicopter during corporate tours. The apartment smelled of stale cigarette smoke and regret. His termination from Viridian was finalized a week later. The email was brief and brutal. He was fired for gross professional misconduct and multiple violations of the company's code of ethical conduct. His stock options were void. His severance was non-existent. His downfall was complete. He had lost his wife, his child, his home, his career, and his reputation all in the space of a few weeks. He would sit in his drab new apartment for hours, staring at the peeling paint on the walls replaying the night of the Gala in his mind. He saw the chandeliers, heard the music, felt the thrill of anticipated victory. And then he saw Nora's face. Not the angry, screaming face he might have expected, but the calm, disappointed, resolute face that had sealed his doom. He had thought he was playing a game of chess, but he had misjudged his opponent. He had seen Nora as a queen, to be protected a piece that solidified his position. He had never realized that in her own game on her own board, she was the one who could topple the king. 6 months passed. The city moved on as it always did, from one scandal to the next. The name Liam Garrett, once whispered in the corridors of power, was now forgotten a footnote in the annals of corporate flameouts. For Nora Wallace, those 6 months were a period of rebirth. The divorce was finalized quickly and cleanly. Helena Shaw had been a shark, and Liam, with no job and dwindling resources, had been in no position to fight. Nora kept the apartment her inheritance protected and received a settlement that would ensure she and the baby were financially secure. But more important than the money was the rediscovery of herself. Freed from the suffocating weight of Liam's ambition and deceit, she flourished. Her architectural design firm, which had been a side project, became her main focus. Desmond Beaumont, true to his word, became her champion. He commissioned her to lead the redesign of the executive suites at Viridian Dynamics' headquarters. It was a major project, one that put her name on the map. Her work was lauded for its innovative use of light and space, its blend of modernism and warmth. She was no longer just Liam Garrett's wife. She was Nora Wallace, a rising star in her own right. In late spring, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Cole after her father. She was surrounded by a loving support system, her mother, her sister, and a circle of loyal friends who had rallied around her. Her apartment, once a place of quiet heartbreak, was now filled with laughter, the smell of baby powder, and the promise of a new, joyful future. She rarely thought of Liam anymore. When she did, it was with a distant clinical pity for a man who had been given everything and had chosen to throw it all away for nothing. For Liam, those same 6 months were an endless night. After his savings ran out, he was forced to sell his Audi and move into an even smaller, cheaper apartment in Queens. The tailored suits and designer watches were sold off one by one to pay for rent and groceries. His job search was a humiliating exercise in futility. His name was blacklisted. Eventually, he took a job that didn't require a background check or references a data entry position at a small logistics company. It was tedious, mind-numbing work in a grey, windowless office. He who had once managed multi-million-dollar projects and commanded teams of people now spent his days typing numbers into a spreadsheet. His boss, a man 10 years his junior, who constantly reminded him about his quotas. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a life he once owned. He avoided the parts of the city where he might run into former colleagues. He ate alone, he slept alone. His only companions were bitterness and regret. One evening, scrolling aimlessly through social media on his phone, a cheap prepaid model, he saw a picture that stopped his heart. It was posted by one of Nora's friends. It was a picture from a baby shower. Nora was in the center, seated in a large wicker chair, radiant and smiling. She was surrounded by friends, her hands resting on her beautiful round belly. She looked happy, genuinely, profoundly happy. In that moment, the full, crushing weight of his loss finally broke through his narcissism and self-pity. It wasn't the job, the money, or the status he mourned. It was her. It was the easy laughter they used to share. It was the way she would look at him with a love and trust he had treated like a disposable commodity. It was the son he would never know, the family he had destroyed. He had traded a kingdom for a handful of dust. He sat there in the darkness of his grim little apartment, the glow of the phone illuminating the tears streaming down his face. He finally understood. The grand gala, the emerald dress, the lies, and the ambition, they were all just distractions. The real story, the only one that ever mattered, was the one he had failed to read. The one about a good woman's love and the priceless future he held in his hands. And he had let it all slip away. This story is a stark reminder that the choices we make, especially those shrouded in darkness, always find their way to the light. Liam Garrett had everything a person could want, but his ambition was a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by love, loyalty, or the miracle of a new life. He chased a hollow, glittering prize blind to the true treasure he already possessed. In the end, he didn't just lose his career, he lost his humanity. Nora, on the other hand, shows us the incredible power that resides in quiet strength and integrity. Faced with the ultimate betrayal, she didn't crumble. She rose. She transformed her deepest pain into a catalyst for her own empowerment, proving that the brightest futures are often built on the ashes of a past we were brave enough to burn down. What did you think of Nora's incredible moment of triumph? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like Liam's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama and powerful stories. Your support helps us continue to bring these narratives to you. Thank you for listening.